Association Board. There is the opening bell, first trading session of this year. Wilson is standing by. Mary.
David, some little bit of weakness in the Dow in the early going, down about 3 points right now. On this first day of trading for 2004, investors are expecting a fairly quiet day of trading. A number of people, of course, remain on vacation, but there are some focus points that investors will be watching, most notably the ISM number, which will be released at 10 Eastern time today. That's a measure of manufacturing activity in the U.S. Also, we're keeping watch on drug distributors. AmerisourceBergen indicated to open lower in the wake of that company losing
your dividends. It's about long way to making good decisions.
Ms. Curtis, thank you. This is upkeep, etc., for the space station project.
This is standing by. John.
Good morning, David, and Happy New Year to all of you out there. Well, the NASDAQ starting out the year as it ended last year with some gains, up 12 points at 2015, finishing 2003 just at the 2003 level. And there are some expectations usually for the end-of-year rally in the market to continue for a couple of days. We're seeing that at least here, that Santa Claus rally continue in the NASDAQ. Already today we're having some news out of some of the companies that trade on this market, starting with Netflix, which saw its online subscribers gain 74% in the year, and that stock is up about $2.50 already today. But on the downside today, Cyphergen lowering its fourth quarter revenue estimate as domestic orders for its new protein chip system fell short of expectations. That stock down almost $3 or losing about 25% of its value. Gear Systems is moving just about 4 cents on the day. They acquired TerraBlaze, a privately held developer of gigabit Ethernet switching products based in Cupertino, California. The deal valued at $21 million. Now, the NASDAQ is coming off that 50% gain last year. It was the third biggest gain ever for the NASDAQ, as you can see on that chart, eclipsed only by 1999 and 1991. But as is true in life, here at the NASDAQ, everything is a matter of timing. And as we look at the 5-year chart, it really all depends on when you got in or out of this market. If you were lucky enough to get in at the low in October of 2002, you're seeing an 80% gain. Of course, you're still down 60% from the high of above 5,000 in 2001. Let's take a look at how some of the big caps are starting off trading here on the NASDAQ today. As we take a look at Intel, Microsoft, Oracle, Sun, and Dell, they are all showing gains at the beginning of the session here. And take a look at this chart. Every single one of these stocks on this chart coming up now were up more than double last year. These were some of the biggest gainers on the NASDAQ last year, Amazon.com among them. And as you can see, they've all started on the upside here today. So a good beginning of the year here at the NASDAQ. David, back to you.
Okay, thanks, John. John Metaxas, the NASDAQ.
Good morning, Happy New Year, and welcome to Morning Call. I'm Liz Clayman.
And I'm Ted David. Here's what's happening. The first key economic report of 2004 due out right about now. It is the Institute for Supply Management's Manufacturing Index for December. Economists are looking for a reading of 61 even, down from 62.8 in November. But as you probably know by now, any figure above 50 would mark the 6th consecutive month of expansion in the manufacturing sector. And as they are wont to do, sometimes they are a little late with that number. And they are late right now. So let's go to Rick Santelli at the Chicago Board of Trade. Good morning, Trader Rick. I know you have your spy glasses with you. You'll be keeping a watch on this, and as soon as it comes out, you'll have it for us. What's going on?
Well, Ted, what I find interesting is I don't see the number out on any of the rolling venues yet that are encircling the exchange, but about 30 seconds ago we did see the futures market sell off a bit, pretty much down towards the lows, especially the long end under the most pressure. Now, indeed, it's probably just some last-second readjustment by an account before the data, but we don't see it yet. Right now we're seeing a pretty aggressive sell-off in the treasuries, and I would guess we should be seeing a pretty good buying spree going on in the equities at some point. The dollar index, well, it's under pressure, and right now we just see we just saw the 10-year note go from 429 to 435, 6 basis points a lot. These are the highest yields. Definitely, we haven't seen these levels.
Speaking of the economy, its recovery won't be a jobless one in 2004. Industrials up 62 points. Trading volume still thin, as a lot of people extend the New Year's Day holiday throughout today and then through the weekend. Obviously, we've got 161 million shares moving there. NASDAQ is up 16 points, now at 2019, trading volume 289 million shares. And the S&P 500 is also getting a little bit of a bump today, up 5 points at 1,117. Which stocks are moving? Well, the 5 most actives on the NYSE: Lucent, GE, Amerisource, Motorola, and Citigroup. Mary Thompson is at the New York Stock Exchange. She's got more on all of the names that are the big stories today. Good morning, Mary.
Good morning, Liz. You know, in the wake of that ISM number, the Dow Jones Industrial Average tacked on about 30 points. It was up about 31 when the numbers crossed. And, of course, the outside gain in the manufacturing numbers caused the Dow to add 30 more. We've given up about 5 since then. But, again, investors very enthusiastic about that number. And also a little bit of a relief rally today that there weren't any major...
Taxes at the NASDAQ market site joins us with more. Good morning, John.
Good morning, and Happy New Year to you, Ted. Yes, we are seeing a nice start to the year here at the NASDAQ, and the trend, of course, has been up. Let's take a look at the last 5 days of trading here. As you can see, NASDAQ had a nice little bit of a run last week above the 2,000 level, and we're extending that today. That Santa Claus rally, if you want to call it that, expected sometimes to extend a couple of days into the new year. NASDAQ right now up some 15 points. There already is some news out on a couple of companies that are talking about it so far this year, starting with Netflix. The online rental service said that it ended up until even a few moments ago was a very quiet session here at the NASDAQ. In contrast to the Dow, the NASDAQ was hardly moving, trading in a very narrow trading range, but now we've seen it pull back a little bit into negative territory, and even the 2,000 level, which had been eclipsed once again last week, perhaps in jeopardy as we head to the close. Volume is not anemic, 1.3 billion, but still what you'd have to consider a quiet trading day. Among the most active stocks on the NASDAQ, the big caps, Microsoft still with a gain of about 6 cents. That's come back from its highs. Intel gaining about 14 cents on the session. Sun up 16 cents, and Cisco still showing gains as well. But a number of stocks having some interesting stories today, including Cyphergen, which is the biggest loser and has been the biggest.
Now that the door to the courtroom in the Martha Stewart-Peter Bukanovic trial has been shut. As soon as we hear any more, I'll bring it to you.
All right, Victoria, let me come back to you. I'm going to skip the sentencing portion of the...
To reassure investors. And if you look at the stock, actually, it's up almost 50% from its low. And it's done extremely well. The president of the company, Martha Stewart Living Omni Media, made great pains to reassure investors that they have contingency plans no matter what happens in this trial. She discussed at length the fact that the brand will continue, maybe perhaps not in its current form.
We are told, and in fact, the courtroom door has been closed, and according to various reports now, marshals are moving to the rope line. Here we go. Let's go back to Mike Huckman, if we might, and see if there are any new developments. Michael, can you hear us?
Number one, not guilty for Martha Stewart on the conspiracy charge. That's count 1, not guilty for Martha Stewart. Count 2, on count 4, I'm sorry, Martha on count 3 is guilty. That is the...
Is guilty, Michael?
I'm sorry. Guilty, 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 guilty.
All right, obviously...
On count 4, which is false statements, she is guilty. Count 4, making false statements, guilty. So not guilty conspiracy. Guilty on making false statements. Guilty on making false statements. There were 2 of them against Martha Stewart. And we're waiting for the obstruction of justice charge, the verdict on that one. But again, not guilty on conspiracy. Guilty for count 1, which is the conspiracy charge against Peter Bukanovic. He is guilty of conspiracy. On count 6, which is the perjury charge, he is guilty. Count 6 is perjury against Peter Bukanovic.
What about 5?
Count 5 is not guilty. And let me just make sure, I want to make sure I get this absolutely right. That is against Peter Bukanovic. He is not guilty on count 5. That is the count of making false statements. Not guilty. It's a tremendous mixed bag here.
False documents.
Michael, can you hear me?
Pardon?
Can you hear me, Michael? All right, so with respect to Martha Stewart, she was guilty on how many counts that you scratched off on our checklist?
Okay, hang on. I'm being told that Peter Bukanovic is not guilty on the count of making and using false documents. That was at 60. Martha is guilty on count 8. I have just been told she is guilty on count 8, but not guilty. Okay. All charges for Martha Stewart. I apologize. The confusion out here is immense. But now I'm being told that Martha Stewart is guilty on the conspiracy charge, guilty of every single charge against her, making false statements in the first interview with the feds, making false statements with the second interview, guilty of obstruction of justice. Now if we can turn to Peter Bukanovic, he too is guilty of obstruction of justice. So for Peter Bukanovic, guilty on conspiracy, not guilty on the count of making false statements. Count 6, he is guilty on the perjury count. He is not guilty on the charge of making and using false documents, and guilty on obstruction of justice. So Frank, the cameraman here, if we could go over this one more time, starting with Martha Stewart. Yes.
Let me just interrupt you for 1 second, because I have to point out that shares of Martha Stewart Living Omnimedia have now been halted. They were last traded up $2.24 at $16.27. And as we suggested, there were two possibilities in this with respect to the way the stock was behaving. One, that people were speculating on a not guilty verdict or an acquittal, or two, were just glad, as Dylan Radigan suggested earlier as well, that the uncertainty surrounding the case would in fact be brought to a conclusion. And Michael, go ahead now and recap the jury's verdict, if you will.
Yes. Again, count number 1 against Martha Stewart, the count of conspiracy, guilty. Making false statements. This is about her first interview with federal investigators, guilty. Guilty in her second interview with federal investigators of making false statements. Guilty on obstruction of justice. The charge there.
But clearly what we do know is that Martha Stewart is found guilty on all 4 counts. I want to bring in NBC's chief legal correspondent, Dan Abrams. A devastating blow to Martha Stewart today, Dan.
Absolutely, John. I can tell you, though, from those people who are watching each and every day.
Yeah.
Ron?
Yes, Mike,
Ron,
go ahead.
I apologize, but you have to understand, just absolutely, it is chaotic out here. And obviously, we're trying to provide the actual, most accurate and factual information. Let me make this correction, very important correction. Peter Bukanovic is guilty on providing false statements to the government. The only count he has been found not guilty of is making and using false documents. Guilty of 4 counts against Peter Bukanovic, guilty on 4 counts against Martha Stewart.
All right, now, Victoria, let me come to you. You suggested that if one was guilty, so was the other, and for all intents and purposes...
More of the verdict on Peter Bukanovic. Rahima?
Absolutely. John, absolutely. On Peter Bukanovic, there were, as I say, 5 charges against him, with the exception of 1 count, and that was making and using false documents. He was found not guilty on that count. But on every other count, the 4 other counts, Peter Bukanovic was found guilty of all the charges against him. That again included the conspiracy, the obstruction of justice, and the perjury charge, because he was under oath when he presented testimony to the SEC, to the FBI, and to other federal investigators back on February of 2002, and it was in reference to what was going on with Martha Stewart's M-clone stock. She sold that stock on December 27th, 2001, and this whole case is built around that sale. The prosecution had alleged, and the jury has now found, that Martha Stewart and Peter Bukanovic conspired to sell her stock when she got an improper tip on information about that M-clone stock. Martha Stewart and Peter Bukanovic had always alleged that they had a prior arrangement to sell if her stock reached the $60 mark. Clearly, the jurors did not buy that argument. The prosecution had put on 5 weeks. This was a 5-week trial. The prosecution had put on 4 weeks with witnesses and testimony and evidence. Martha Stewart had only put up 1 witness in her defense in this trial. Peter Bukanovic had put up 4 witnesses in his defense. Clearly, the jury found that they were not credible, and the presentation from the government was. All along, the defense attorney for Martha Stewart had said it was such a dumb thing that they would conspire to do something like this, and that she was too smart to do something so dumb. But the prosecution has said sometimes smart people do dumb things, and apparently it seems that the jurors accepted that argument today, with Martha Stewart being found guilty of all 4 counts against
Martha Stewart are going to make a brief statement. Robert Morvillo, presumably here outside the courthouse, where, as you can see behind me, a tremendous crowd is gathered as the news has leaked out, has come out, I should say, that there has been a guilty verdict again on all 4 counts against Martha Stewart. Stewart, conspiracy, twice making false statements to federal investigators, guilty of obstruction of justice. Peter Bukanovic, also convicted on 4 counts. The only thing he was acquitted of is making and using false documents. The worksheet that he allegedly put an @60 notation next to Imclone after the investigation started. Apparently, the jury believed that the government did not prove that charge. But what I wanted to tell you is that we are awaiting a short statement, we are told it's going to be, from Martha Stewart's lead lawyer, Robert Morvillo. Back to you.
All right, thanks, Mike. I want to go to Bob Pisani, who's at the New York Stock Exchange at the Martha Stewart Post. The stock has halted, Robert. What are you hearing down there?
Yeah, well, it was interesting, Ron, because it's been a while since we've seen cries come up on the floor here. As Mike Huckabee, we had the monitor up here watching Mike clicking off the guilty, not guilty things, and every time he clicked off a guilty thing, another cry went up from the crowd. Almost immediately, the stock was halted for news pending. That's an important distinction. That is not an order imbalance. News pending halts trading of the stock, not just here, but all over any other places where the stock might be trading. Stock at $2.31 to the upside, at $16.34, and it's been a while since I've heard people screaming down here on the floor as those verdicts were read. But that monitor, everyone down here was glued to that monitor watching Mike Huckabee click off those various ticks. Right now, a small crowd is gathered, not as big as the one that was there just prior to the verdict being read, but still pretty sizable. I'd say 40 or 50 traders.
And you know, Bob, it's Sue Ferreira. You know, it's not just Martha Stewart living on the media that we have to watch as well. It's also Kmart, because that stock was running up just before the verdict came in, with a lot of investors obviously assuming that perhaps it would be a good outcome for Martha Stewart. Obviously, it has not been. That stock is one to watch. It relies very heavily on the Martha Stewart Living brand. It's a large part of their sales, and was a large part before this whole thing began in their strategy to emerge successfully from bankruptcy. So Kmart is another stock to watch.
And of course, Kmart does not trade down here
absolutely
anymore.
No, it trades on the NASDAQ, obviously, but it's one that traders have been talking about in terms of impact on the retail side of things. Martha Stewart also has a lot of exposure at Sears as well. Sears carries a lot of their high-end brands, her paints and the like. So there are a lot of other companies that are exposed to this verdict and the ripple effects that it will cause on down the line.
That's right, Sue. And I'm just glancing over here to see if the stock, if the company lifts the trading halt, there are indications that will be put up. There's not any indications even right now. So I think we may be a ways from opening the stock right now. So I'll try to get some more information.
All right, thanks, Bob. Let's go to Garrett Glaser now, who is at Martha Stewart headquarters in Manhattan. And Garrett, when we spoke last, you said you saw some employees coming into the company's doors, and you described them as tight-lipped. Have you seen any come in or out now that the verdict has been delivered?
No, I've seen 2 come out just before it was delivered and again said not a word. However, let me tell you this, if we step back a little bit, and one attorney told us it would not be legal, assuming...
I have to go back to Mike Huckabee. He has got a date now on which both these individuals will be sentenced. Michael, what can you tell us?
I am told that the sentencing date is June the 10th. That the sentencing is June the 10th. Again, the maximum on each count is 5 years. So both of these defendants, Martha Stewart and Peter Bukanovic, are looking at as much as 20 years in prison, but it is so important to point out that that will likely be drastically reduced. The judge could depart as low as probation or give them several months in prison. But at this point, they are facing a maximum of 5 years in prison. At this moment, standing by is CNBC reporter Scott Cohn, who was inside the courtroom when the verdicts are read. He is going to give us a blow-by-blow, all the details of what happened as the verdicts were read against Martha Stewart and Peter Bukanovic. Again, both of them convicted on 4 counts. Peter Bukanovic was actually facing 5 counts, but he was acquitted of the making and using false documents charge. Again, our Scott Cohn was inside the courtroom. He has just rushed outside from inside the courthouse, and he is now going to tell us, Scott, what happened as these verdicts were read.
Well, as you well know, Mike, they have been very not betraying any emotion throughout this trial, and it was the same as the verdicts were read, at least in the well of the court. But behind them, the members of the family, the public relations team, and so on, not a dry eye in those couple of rows, a lot of wiping of tears and so on.
What about her daughter? Was she in the courtroom?
Her daughter was in the courtroom. There was no interaction between the defendants and the families. even as they came out. Very, very serious and not, again, betraying any emotion. Alexis Stewart also was dabbing tears from her eyes. That's her daughter.
Was her mother in the courtroom?
Her mother was not in the courtroom. Peter Buchanovic's parents were in the courtroom. They were basically stoic as they've been. That's basically it. It was very, very subdued, but clearly they were disappointed.
What did Peter Buchanovich or Martha Stewart do? Did they bury their heads in their hands? Did they emote at all?
Not at all.
Not at all.
And you know, there was a time for about an hour or so that we had kind of inklings that there may be a verdict, and there was a lot of just kind of small talk going on. No one quite sure what this actually meant. The judge came out at about 3 o'clock Eastern Time and said they do have a verdict. Things got very serious, but again, no emotion shown. Martha Stewart was very serious as she left the courtroom. Whether she was trying to keep her emotions in check or whatever, obviously we don't know.
Did she or Peter make eye contact with the jurors when they came in, left, or as they were reading the verdict?
The jurors all were looking down. The jurors did not make eye contact with either defendant, and sometimes that's a giveaway that they are about to convict, and clearly in this case it was. So there was no eye contact. They certainly were looking for any indication, as you might expect.
Who read the verdict, the judge or the jury foreperson?
The judge read the verdict. Then the judge polled the jurors by name. Is this your verdict? They each answered yes. They were given an opportunity to speak to the press. There's a room in the courthouse, and it was not clear whether they were going to avail themselves of that. It did not appear that they were going to. We'll see what happens. The judge also might set sentencing for Martha Stewart and Peter Buchanovich for June 17th.
Oh, it's the 17th. We had heard it was the 10th.
Originally it was the 10th. There was a scheduling issue. It is the 17th, pending pre-sentence reports and so on.
And as far as the courtroom is concerned, I know it was packed. Was there an audible gasp? What was the reaction in the gallery of the courtroom?
The only reaction there seemed to be was a lot of reporters, journalists heading for the exit to get the word out. The judge quickly called the room to order, said this is a court proceeding, and again went ahead, polled the jury, said that juries are the last grassroots government in this country, thanked them for their service, and essentially sent them on their way.
And as far as Martha Stewart and Peter Buchanovich are concerned, did Martha hug her daughter? Did Peter Buchanovich hug his parents?
No.
Did they hug their lawyers?
No.
Anything?
There was none of that. I'm sure that there will be a time and a place for that, but as far as in the courtroom was concerned, there was none of that.
Scott, do you think that they were told don't emote? How could that be when you're convicted of 4 counts, facing 5 years each on each one, that you have no visible reaction?
Well, there's no doubt that there is a reaction inside, clearly, but I don't know whether they were told to, whether this is just something that they decided that they wanted to keep private. Clearly they knew. There were a lot of people directly behind them looking at every move, making notes of everything that they did, and perhaps they just wanted to save it for another time.
Ron, back to you.
All right, gentlemen, thanks very much. We should point out that the New York Stock Exchange has now published an indication as to where Martha Stewart Living Omnimedia shares are currently indicated. The bid is 8, the ask is 10. The last trade was 16.34. So the stock ran up dramatically and is now indicated to open as much as 50% lower. As Sue Herrera pointed out, we need to watch Kmart shares. We're showing you those on the screen now, and they are down more than $1. And Kmart shares, as you see, are off 90 cents at 32 evening. We should also point out, by the way, that U.S. Attorney David Kelly is expected to make a statement at a time that is yet to be announced. We will, of course, carry that live as soon as it becomes available to us. And Sue, you pointed this out that you know the Kmart, while Martha Stewart was halted, is going to be the tracking stock for investor sentiment. But we see now that that stock is likely to open substantially below where it was halted.
There's been a lot of day trading activity in MSO. The volume has been increasing, and I know.
And as we mentioned while they were talking at the courthouse, this is a huge victory for the U.S. government, not just as it pertains to Martha Stewart. After the hung trial with Frank Quattrone, Skilling coming up, Kozlowski still out there, this is a very big deal for them.
But today, one of the key charges against Kozlowski was thrown out, which I think added
enterprise conspiracy.
Enterprise conspiracy.
Securities fraud was thrown out for Martha Stewart.
Right. So there have been a lot of different elements to these government trials that are going on that led a lot of people to speculate that perhaps some of the cases by the government may not have been presented as well as others. And as a result of that, I think that that was part of the reason for all the day trading activity in the stock. But Ron's right. Kmart is a stock to watch. Sears, I would also argue, is a stock to watch. Kmart tried to get back some of the royalties from MSO, from Martha Stewart Living Omnimedia. That was not successful, at least not yet. It'll be interesting to see whether or not Kmart pursues that once again. This is their lifeline.
We're going to show now just a recap of the verdict in the Martha Stewart case. You can see that she was convicted on all counts. 1 of conspiracy, 2 of making false statements, 1 of obstruction of justice. Mr. Bukanovic, meanwhile, the former Merrill Lynch stockbroker who sold stock of Imclone on behalf of Ms. Stewart, was convicted on 4 out of 5 counts. Joe Tacopina, if I may come to you. Dylan talking about the big victory for the government as we look now at the guilty count against Peter Bukanovic. Mike Huckman pointed out that each could receive up to about 20 years in prison. Does the judge, under federal sentencing guidelines, have the latitude to allow them to serve those sentences concurrently, or are there very strict rules that might force them into jail, of course, pending appeal, for a considerable period of time?
No, they're not going to jail. At least Martha Stewart's not going to jail for a considerable period of time. Those numbers that are being tossed around, Ron, those are statutory maximums for that count. The guidelines are not driven by that. The federal...
I'd like you to weigh in, if you would, on how much time Martha Stewart will... Do you agree with what Joe said earlier?
Oh, absolutely. So you know what? There's not even an ability not to agree.
Manhattan, Michael?
Yeah, Ron, I am joined by a familiar face to CNBC viewers, a man we interview quite often, securities fraud lawyer Jake Zemansky, who I might point out has been attending this trial nearly every day for about the past 2 weeks. He says simply because it was the Super Bowl of securities law cases. He was inside when the verdict was read, as was our Scott Cohn. Mr. Zemansky, can you please tell us what it was like?
It was amazing to see this jury so unanimous and so quickly coming in with so many counts of conviction. I think the evidence was strong. This jury from day one was very attentive, taking notes, and did a very thorough job.
Were you surprised?
Absolutely not. I had been predicting this for about a week. I thought the evidence was strong. I thought there was clear cover up here, and this jury got it.
What was so strong?
I think it was clear that from Daniel's testimony and the surrounding circumstances that Martha got a tip, a secret tip on December 27th. Waxel was selling.
No, go ahead, Michael.
Okay, we are looking at the clips now of the, these are the people running out the stairs, correct, Andy, our producer, who were running out with the placards that many news organizations, including ours and our NBC partners as well, that were using for news of the verdicts to come out. It was a color-coded system that might seem archaic, but given the fact that no telecommunications devices are allowed inside the courthouse, this was the system that we use and is part of the reason for some of the confusion. As you can see how frantic and fast and furious those runners, if you will, came out of the building informing us of the verdict. Mr. Zemansky, I also wanted to point out that you have no connection to this case. You are not suing on behalf of any shareholders, even though this is your bailiwick of Martha Stewart Living Omnimedia.
Absolutely not. I've got no connection to this case, just as an observer and a securities lawyer in the top trial of the decade.
So what does this mean to securities law, securities fraud law, to the United States government, to Martha Stewart Living?
This sends a message to corporate America and to Wall Street. Don't get in. You got 2 choices. Keep your mouth shut and take the fifth. Cooperate with the regulators. Lying to the government is not an option.
Mr. Zemansky, there have been a lot of pundits and PR people that I've talked to who said if she...
take off, but I want to ask you to respond to that the government did not want a pound of flesh in
this prosecution, and we need not put a defense on.
Well, Victoria, as I said, we were guessing, and I sure hope you didn't have any more information.
Well, I didn't buy or sell stock based on what you said, Joe.
Well, I hope not. I said that, by the way, Victoria.
Speaking of that, and we don't want to make too light of the buying and selling of stock, because obviously people are going to end up losing a considerable amount of money in this thus far. If we can get Bob Pisani back, he's been spending a lot of time at the Crowd, where Martha Stewart trades on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. Just to bring you up to date, the shares were halted, although it looks like the halt Well, it's hard to tell if the halt's been lifted. The stock's quoted right now at $13.50. It was indicated to have a bid and ask spread of $8 to $10. It does look like it's trading now down $3.03 from its last trade to $11 even. And you know, Dylan, it was interesting that people were so actively engaged in trading the stock, knowing only that there was a verdict, not what the verdict was. And there are going to be a lot of complaints about whether or not the coverage of the event led people to move in a particular direction. Certainly that wasn't the case when we were talking about it. We kept pointing out it was only a verdict without any other information.
I tend to think that the biggest complaint, if there is one, and the one that would likely have the most validity, is the failure to halt the stock when you were in that information vacuum. That, if there's going to be an analysis of how this went as far as the stock is concerned, why didn't they halt it when there was a clear situation where you were trading without the information
And why did
necessary?
the company not request a halt?
Yeah.
You know, even if
well, now that's interesting because the company may not. I mean, while they know that a verdict was delivered, then they would have to make a very formal request. Although Bob Pisani pointed out earlier that there is a mechanism through which
there's a mechanism through which
that stock
they
could have
can
been halted, even at the floor level.
Right.
Yeah. And we should just to recap point out that Martha Stewart shares are down now $3.02 at 11.01. The shares of Kmart, which is a big distributor of Martha Stewart products, now traded on the Nasdaq, also lower. Bob Pisani, you're on the floor, I should say, in the crowd. Or in the booth now. What are you seeing going on, or what did you see down there today?
Yeah, what we saw, Ron, was a rather extraordinary moment when Mike Huckman was initially checking off the guilty and not guilty.